I've heard this challenge many times from Muslim friends. Show me just one Quran manuscript that's different from the one we have today. And honestly, it's a great question. But as it turns out, one scholar, Dr. Dan Brewbaker, has spent years doing exactly that. He's been deep in the archives, looking at thousands of the oldest Quran pages, and he's found real physical corrections, words that were scraped away, lines written over, even the name Allah added in later. So in this explainer, we're going to look at what he found, what it means, and just as important, what it doesn't mean. I'm Dr. Craig, and on this channel, we help you think clearly about Christianity, Islam, and the Bible. If careful work like this helps you, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. So this challenge, right here on the screen, it's really powerful because it gets to the heart of a core belief, the idea of a perfectly preserved, divinely protected text. And that is precisely the claim that Dan Brewbaker set out to investigate, not by getting into debates, but by going straight to the source, to the actual physical manuscripts themselves.
All right, so here's our plan. We'll start with that claim of perfection. Then we'll meet the manuscript detective himself. We'll look at the physical evidence he uncovered, sort out what it means for doctrine versus history, and finally get to the real significance of it all.
Okay, first things first. Let's really understand the foundational claim that we're looking at. Grasping this idea is absolutely key to seeing why the manuscript evidence is such a big deal.
You see, this isn't just a casual idea. It's a really profound theological claim. The belief is that the Quran you can buy in a bookstore today is a perfect, letter-for-letter copy of the original revelation, and that this perfection has been guaranteed by God himself. So it's this very specific claim of a miraculously preserved text that makes looking at the actual physical evidence so fascinating.
So the big question is, how does that claim of perfection stack up against what we find in the earliest manuscripts? To figure that out, we need to meet the man at the center of this research.
Now, Dr. Brubaker isn't some academic just reading about this stuff in an office. No, he's a hands-on specialist. He has spent years inside the world's top libraries in London, Paris, Istanbul, physically holding and poring over some of the oldest Qurans that still exist. And his project was incredibly straightforward. Just document any visible, physical change, any correction where a scribe altered the text.
And you gotta appreciate the scale of his work. We are not talking about a couple of random pages. Brewbaker has personally examined over 10,000 pages from these very early manuscripts. And in doing so, he's documented thousands of corrections. So what this means is his findings aren't just based on a few weird anomalies, they reveal a clear, widespread pattern. So when we say a correction, what are we actually talking about? This is where it gets really interesting because we're diving into what you can physically see on the parchment.
And this is a super important point. We're not talking about the little dots and vowel marks that were added to the Arabic script way later to make it easier to read. No, Brewbaker is focused on changes to the consonantal text, the actual letters that form the words. These are direct edits to the original writing.
And you can see how they did it. Scribes would literally take a knife and scrape the ink off the animal skin to rewrite something. Or they just write over the old text with darker ink. You can also see words squeezed in between the lines or in the margins. Sometimes they even pasted a little patch of parchment over the original text to write on top of it. These aren't theories, these are physical, undeniable changes to the text.
So what kinds of things were being changed? Well, a few patterns pop up again and again. You might find a verse where the word Allah was clearly missing and a later scribe squeezed it in. Or you'll see grammatical fixes like adding the word huwa, which means he, to make the sentence clearer. And maybe the most revealing, you find corrections that change a verse in one manuscript to make it match the reading found in other manuscripts.
But here's maybe the most stunning piece of evidence. It's not just that there are corrections. It's that you find the exact same correction in the exact same verse across multiple manuscripts that come from totally different places and times. Brewbaker calls them trouble spots.
So you have to ask yourself, is that just a coincidence? I mean, what are the odds that different scribes working independently would all make the exact same mistake and then fix it in the exact same way? It strongly suggests the problem wasn't with the individual scribe. The problem, the variation, was already there much earlier in the text's history.
Okay, this leads us to the biggest question of all, and it's one where we have to be really careful and intellectually honest. What is the actual impact of all these thousands of corrections?
Well, you really have to separate this into two categories, the impact on doctrine and the impact on history. So do these corrections change core Islamic theology, like the oneness of God? Based on what Brubaker has published, the answer is no. Most are minor scribal fixes, but do they affect the historical claim that the text has been perfectly preserved, letter for letter, without any changes? Yes, absolutely. The physical evidence itself challenges that specific claim.
And I really want to emphasize this point. It is so important that we don't overstate the case. And Muslim scholars are right when they say these changes don't invent a new theology. Acknowledging that is absolutely vital because our credibility depends on being honest with the evidence and not trying to make it say more than it does. So, if these corrections aren't some kind of doctrinal bombshell, why does any of this matter? What's the real takeaway here?
Well, the real significance here is historical. What these manuscripts show isn't some grand conspiracy to corrupt the text. No, it shows something much more normal. It shows a human process. It shows real scribes copying a sacred text, making the kinds of mistakes humans make, and then other scribes coming along and making corrections to standardize it.
And this really challenges the simple version of the story we often hear. The tradition says that the Caliph Uthman standardized the text and had all the other versions burned. But what these manuscripts show is that even within that official version, the text was still fluid. It was still being actively edited and corrected for a long time, and that human process left its fingerprints all over these ancient pages.
Now, all of this sets up a fascinating comparison, which is a question we're going to tackle next time. The New Testament has way more documented variants, but there was no emperor or caliph ordering all the rival copies to be burned. So it leads you to wonder which of these two approaches, these two very different manuscript traditions, actually gives you more reason to have confidence in the text you're reading today. It's a question worth thinking about.
Hey, if this careful look at the evidence was helpful for you, please subscribe and maybe share it with a friend, especially someone who thinks that no variance automatically means a text is more trustworthy. We're going to dig into that very idea in our next explainer. Thanks so much for watching.